Ubisoft has brilliantly managed to lose 26% of its stock value after the release of the critically acclaimed 10 quadrillion player success AC Shadows. Meanwhile, their supposed blockbuster still hasn't even cracked 1 million copies sold on PC, which accounts for roughly a third of total sales, with the highest industry estimates hovering around a measly 700,000 copies. Clearly, this is undeniable proof that all those evil Western influencers inventing fake controversies have been utterly crushed by the heroic Ubisoft alliance valiantly defending Ubisoft's honor from Reddit forums, disingenuous video essays, and the cozy staff lounges of gaming media. Journalists at PC Gamer, Video Games Chronicle, and others have proudly proclaimed Ubisoft's massive success, declaring Shadows as achieving the second highest revenue in the series 2 weeks ago, citing the ever-reliable VG Insights. Oddly enough, none of them actually linked to this groundbreaking data, even though they usually hyperlink every second word in their articles. Naturally, I decided to check it myself. Ubisoft's historic triumph, which supposedly silenced all critics and ushered in a glorious new era of Ubisoft dominance by losing 26% of the stock value, amounts to an earth-shattering $25 million in gross revenue. Let's repeat that slowly. The biggest success in Ubisoft's history is a paltry $25 million PC revenue. So if we round this up, they at best made $83.5 million in revenue overall. Considering Ubisoft likely burned through upwards of $300 million on Shadows, development and marketing included, we're truly witnessing one of gaming's finest financial achievements. Clearly a business strategy for the ages, and Ubisoft's shareholders are visibly impressed. Now, someone recently commented under my last video asking why I was so hateful towards Shadows, but I'm not at all hateful, I'm just genuinely entertained by the surreal comedy provided on a daily basis by the Ubisoft Defense Force. Speaking of comments, feel free to share your thoughts below. As always, every opinion is welcome, even from our most passionate Ubisoft enthusiasts. But let's circle back to today's topic. Gaming journalism's hilariously inconsistent reviews and the increasingly noticeable fact that a lot of reviewers just have absolutely no idea what they're talking about when reviewing a video game. I'm not just talking about awkward backpedaling or the deafening silence we are witnessing now that the game's failure has become undeniable. I'm fascinated by this strange habit reviewers have developed where they meticulously list 20 massive flaws about a game and then, without missing a beat, declare it a masterpiece and a return to form. Let me offer you a perfect example. About 4 months ago, I released a video highlighting critical problems with Assassin's Creed that Shadows had clearly no intention of fixing. As a longtime fan of the series, I particularly pointed out how the parkour mechanics, once rather iconic and also to an extent at least skill-based, especially in Brotherhood, have become utterly meaningless and bland in Shadows. I was suggesting something more inspired almost by Mirror's Edge, where players' skill, timing, and your character's speed actually matter in the parkour. Well, surprise surprise, just 3 weeks ago, GameStar, the biggest gaming outlet in the German-speaking world, released a short titled "Dieses Feature fehlt mir in AC Shadows." This feature is missing from AC Shadows, making virtually the same points I did months ago, complete with a Mirror's Edge comparison. Now, am I accusing them of stealing my brilliant insights? Of course not. These issues were glaringly obvious from Ubisoft's very first gameplay reveals back in September. My issue isn't about credit, it's about consistency. Parkour isn't just some minor side feature, it's central to Assassin's Creed's identity, yet these journalistic muppets, whether in English or German, admit that Shadows parkour is bland, meaningless trash, and then instantly turn around and call the game a return to form. It's surprising how we even got to this point. It doesn't even stop with the parkour. This bizarre pattern repeats with every major feature in AC Shadows. Take stealth. Reviewers admit the AI is laughably incompetent and the new going prone mechanic completely destroys any semblance of balanced gameplay, since the guards somehow become even dumber than when you're just crouching. And again, this is something that is pointed out in the GameStar review as quote-unquote classical Ubisoft AI issues, yet somehow the stealth is still mentioned as a major strength in the review, literally just after talking about how terrible the AI is. This is bordering an oxymoron. You can't say that the AI is stupid and the stealth is great, as barely any other feature in a game lives as much from the AI as stealth does. If the AI doesn't function in the first place, any stealth mechanic becomes useless because there is no need to use it due to how dumb the AI is, and it won't even be able to counter anything you do. What's even worse is how glaring these issues were from the very first gameplay reveals. Who could have possibly predicted all of those groundbreaking revelations of the AI being utter trash? Well, literally everyone with 2 eyes months ago. I'm sure you noticed this too when you saw the very first gameplay reveals with Naui sneaking through this castle. You can comment down below, but I'm pretty sure that this was something that was generally noticed within the gaming community, at least outside of Reddit. But noticing such glaring flaws is something for us, the mere gaming peasants. Pray tell, esteemed games journalists, wouldn't such crippling flaws with AI, parkour, story, facial animations, etc., which were visible since before the game has released and are visible now that the game has released, even with you admitting that they are there, hurt the enjoyment of a series fundamentally built around, well, I don't know, stealth, parkour, and strong narratives? Apparently not. The typical journo carefully acknowledges the AI isn't quote-unquote particularly sophisticated, and the new mechanics quote-unquote don't innovate all that much, only to immediately declare Shadow's stealth a masterful return to form. At least they finally stopped parroting Ubisoft's embarrassing claim that Naui is the most talented assassin in the franchise's history. Small victories, I suppose. Now, I won't bore you by detailing every issue, but from shallow combat mechanics to the lifeless story and facial animations that make characters look like melted wax figures, every aspect of Shadows receives identical treatment. Softly acknowledge an obvious flaw, then pivot immediately to praise exactly what they just criticized. It's a fascinating tactic, and even more fascinating is how effectively it convinces the average Redditor to furiously defend Ubisoft's honor online, though admittedly there aren't too many left these days, as the game's success has clearly been so massive that there is no longer any need to argue for it. In all seriousness, this recent subsidiary spin-off, granting exclusive licenses for all major Ubisoft franchises, seems to have marked the final desperate mobilization of the Shill Volkssturm, bravely battling against reality itself, or as we would say in German, die normative Kraft des Faktischen. Sadly for them, reality always wins in the end, and now all but the most fanatical Ubishills have quietly retreated, moving on to the next great Reddit meltdown. We'll talk about the regular Shills defending AC Shadows a little bit later in greater detail, but what I found to be still the most surprising and almost belief-defying thing about this is just how glaring the flaws and undeniable the flaws were from the earliest gameplay trailers we saw, while journalists and diehard Shills continued to hype up this game as if it were the second coming of Christ. That's the most baffling part. We're not talking about some intangible matter of taste here, like personal preferences for voice acting or art style. No, we're dealing with crucial, measurable aspects of game design. Whether the AI can competently react to players' actions, whether movement systems require any active actual input from the player, whether combat loops and progression make any logical sense for an RPG, what this game is trying to be, these elements aren't subjective abstractions of artistic merit. They can be tested and validated by anyone who bothers to spend 10 minutes genuinely playing the game and then hopefully uses their large experience of having played various games, which gave them a general frame of reference, to then compare AC Shadows to this frame of reference. While some outlets at least feigned ignorance or conveniently forgot to mention the game's failures, actual gamers who genuinely care about a title's merit rather than virtue signaling or pushing some agenda recognized these shortcomings long ago. You'd think professional reviewers with their so-called industry connections and early access privileges might have caught these glaring issues before the average internet user, but apparently were meant to believe none of the objective shortcomings of AC Shadows warranted any concern, or even warrant any concern now when everyone can plainly see them. Meanwhile, among major content creators, the only slop defenders left are rage baiters like Upper Echelon Gaming, whose entire chain of arguments relies on Shadows supposedly being a smashing success, something a 10-second search could easily debunk. Even if Shadows had turned a genuine profit, that wouldn't magically fix its critical design failings. The reason these shills in media and some content creators focus on sales figures with a game like this, rather than mechanics, story, or genuine gameplay depth by explaining why those things are so great, is simple. They have no idea what they're talking about. They don't analyze fundamental craft, so they cling to superficial success narratives, instead of addressing the actual flaws plainly visible to anyone paying attention. This is honestly a shame because it forces us to argue on the same rather mindless level. There are plenty of excellent games that sold barely any copies, and likewise massive hits that were absolute garbage from a game design perspective. The modern shooters of the early to mid-2010s demonstrate this perfectly. Take Battlefield 3 or Call of Duty Advanced Warfare for example, which had unbearably sloppy single-player modes but still sold extremely well. The real issue is that shills and rage baiters are either blatantly ignorant or deliberately feigning it. For instance, you'll find people who defend clips of enemies failing to hit Naue as she crawls on her belly for 10 minutes straight with dismissive lines like, "Are realistic hitboxes bad now?" You can't discuss objective game design merits with individuals like this. It's simply a waste of time. The only tactic they even somewhat respond to is hammering on a game's commercial failure, even though that alone doesn't define its quality. Yet as we've seen, these same shills will still attempt to spin something like Shadows, which is such a massive success it's plainly visible to everyone who googles the Ubisoft stock price, as a success, despite it just earning at best 50 million on a $300+ million budget. As to why some people cling so desperately to defending AC Shadows, one plausible explanation is that they prioritize brand loyalty or a sense of personal identity over genuine critique. Admitting a game's flaws would undermine their sense of belonging or credibility within some social circles. By certain circles, I refer to the far-left upper-middle-class milieus in the West, which are sociologically collectively referred to as the bourgeois bohème. The brand loyalty of these people isn't really to Ubisoft or Assassin's Creed, but to a certain brand of content, which willingly subjugates itself to the extreme proselytization of the far-left progressive elite, something that in a day-to-day context would be called going woke. Another angle is almost Pavlovian, I believe. Shadows has been positioned by Ubisoft's marketing as this righteous crusade that supposedly owns the evil chuds who made up all of those cultural controversies and whatever. So defending it becomes a quick route to feeling morally superior. It's not just about liking a game anymore, it's not even about really playing this game. It's about proving your virtue to the online crowd by defending it publicly. Therein lies the Pavlovian response. This type of behavior has been conditioned in large parts of the online left. Just like the dog in Pavlov's experiment who has learned to associate the ring of the bell with food and therefore involuntarily salivates at the sound, the online leftist has associated defending failing ideologically progressive content with an endorphin-inducing sense of moral superiority over the average, less educated and less moral person. Which means the far leftist defense of a game like Shadows is less of an active, thoughtful or rational act, I believe, and more of an instinctual knee-jerk response born out of a form of social conditioning. And as fascinating as thinking about the reasons to defend AC Shadows actually is, ultimately they are more or less irrelevant, because the behavior always boils down to the same rather concerning practical effect when talking about a video game. It's all about dismissing objective design critiques in favor of shallow talking points, hoping that loud repetition of calling you a bigot or calling you a chud might overshadow the obvious truth that the game is trash. Which brings us to an important question when talking about people ignoring the objective measurements of game design. Are we ignoring that gaming obviously also has an artistic side by calling out all of these objective design flaws? Well, of course there is an artistic side of gaming, but it can never be used to mask the fact that the reviewer has no idea what they're talking about in terms of game design, or even placing AC Shadows within the series and the wider genre it's supposed to be a part of. The overarching story, visual style, voice performances for fantasy settings, even topics like cultural references, those can be subjective discussions. Yet this should never be used to water down objective matters of game design craftsmanship. To give you an example from another game in the series, AC Unity has storytelling-wise chosen a romance with a tragic end, clearly inspired by the classical dramas. It's a story that, in my opinion, artistically works very well with the Parisian setting. It even brought a new story focus for the series, and therefore I like it from an artistic and more abstract and subjective perspective. When we look at this story objectively, in terms of craftsmanship, the story of Arnaud and Elise is handled very well. At times it can be a bit cliché, but dialogues are well written, flow naturally, and most importantly, the story fulfills its emotional goals. I personally don't know anyone who wasn't hit by the finale and felt the weight of the tragedy at least a little bit. This is something that you can't argue with. I don't know anyone who would objectively argue the quality of Unity's writing, but subjectively I know a lot of people who say that the story is too cliché or too unimaginative, and that it can never be the same as, say, the story of Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, which is more creative in terms of its artistic ideas, but you can never mix up this subjective critique with the objective quality of the writing of the story. Those are two very different things, yet the average game reviewer tries to intermingle and mix them, and therefore hide the fact that they have no idea what they're talking about, because you can defend almost every position in a subjective artistic argument. You can say almost everything with a few semi-intellectual sounding arguments. You could call a banana stapled to a wall a masterful piece of art. We've actually seen this in real life. When you ignore the objective craftsmanship and just start emptily throwing artistic phrases into the debate, you're successfully derailing it from any analysis of objective craftsmanship merit, which could be judged by comparison to other products or to the expectations of the community as a whole. Judging game design and writing as a craft is very different from the artistic judgment of these aspects. One is always subjective and can be clearly judged based on whether it achieves clearly defined goals or standards, whereas the artistic merit can always be debated, as I just said. It is a general rule that a critic who uses pseudo-intellectual babble about some subjective matters of art is usually a bad critic who has no idea what he's talking about. That goes for every field, from cooking to music to gaming. This rule goes for Shadows as well. You can talk about how much you like its artistic direction. I don't know what you could like about its artistic direction, but say the unique blending of Chinese and Japanese architecture in a never-before-seen manner. But the fundamentals of game design are different. If an enemy is coded to wander a 3-foot radius in stealth sections, never reacting to you, or if the protagonist's parkour animations trigger basically automatically with you just holding down a button and doing nothing, those are objective shortcomings, and if a title marketed itself heavily on returning to the roots of stealth and parkour, then failing those roots isn't exactly a trivial misstep. Still, the hype train thundered on. Major outlets selectively regurgitated Ubisoft's marketing bullet points, hailing the game as the Assassin's Creed experience fans had been begging for since AC2, rarely stopping to note that anyone who played actual stealth or parkour games could see that Shadows was basically running on training wheels due to how shallow, hollow, and empty all the mechanics are. Not even speaking of the quality of those mechanics. It's almost like these shills online and in gaming media prefer repeating a PR script over informing their audience. The end result is this bizarre disconnect where gaming media praises second highest revenue in the series while conveniently forgetting to mention that $75 million in revenue hardly covers a fraction of Ubisoft's colossal costs, and we, the players, are left to untangle reality from a web of promotional spin. But let's talk about why this matters beyond just pointing fingers at corporate shills. Reviews are supposed to guide consumers, helping them decide where to invest their money and, more importantly, their time. In an age of inflation, $70 might not break the bank for everyone, but 70 hours spent slogging through a subpar game is 70 hours you never get back. If some beloved Shill influencer hypes the game, many people will push through those tedious 20+ hours, convinced they just haven't gotten to the good part yet. That's a tragic waste of time, all because a few critics felt obligated to sprinkle some sugar on a turd. Or maybe, considering the leaked data of how much Ubisoft invested into buying off Shill influencers, maybe quite a few reviewers felt more obliged to their generous paymasters at Ubisoft than their audience. But even ignoring those moral questions, there is a core problem in being overly friendly in reviewing a video game, and that's that game design as a craft evolves through constructive criticism. If no one calls out Ubisoft's failings, the company has no incentive to fix them. And by constructive criticism, I mean critiques that focus on actual issues, mechanics, balance, AI, story, rather than tiptoeing around to spare some fragile ego or a massive paycheck. A critique can absolutely be harsh or biting, and that doesn't invalidate its substance one bit. We've watched entire franchises degrade over time precisely because studios mistake polite, usually paid-off pandering for genuine quality. Look no further than AC Shadows. The devs were busy thanking the Assassin's Creed subreddit for all their support just 2 weeks ago, and now they're bracing for mass layoffs. Turns out that virtue signaling on social media can't magically salvage your bottom line. If Ubisoft claimed Shadows was a bold return to the franchise's roots, then by all means it's fair to judge it on those claims. Critics who highlight the game's core mechanical failings aren't being hateful, they're doing their job. That's exactly how the medium improves, yet we keep seeing blanket endorsements online. Masterpiece, incredible comeback, and this is then followed by disclaimers like, the AI may have some issues, as though that mitigates the fact that the stealth AI barely qualifies as AI at all. In the end, the fiasco around Shadows highlights a broader trend. Certain gaming outlets and online influencers have forgotten that honesty is more important than playing nice with publishers. It's reached a point of toxic positivity where your perceived obligation to remain friendly and non-critical ends up betraying the viewers who trust you. I'd rather be twice as harsh than risk letting people waste their money and time on absolute slop. You can't fix a problem you refuse to acknowledge. So here we are, with Ubisoft hemorrhaging stock value, Shadows failing to sell 2 million copies overall, and a legion of journals somehow missing every red flag. The contradictions speak for itself. If the game were so massively phenomenal and such a successful title, we'd see it in the numbers and even more in the engagement around the game. Even if a game doesn't sell well, if it's amazing, you will easily find an active community that still enjoys it and isn't busy virtue signaling about how progressive and great game XYZ is and how all the haters are racists. I can give you some games I enjoy as examples: Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, Anno 1404 and 2070. Even though no one knows these games, to be honest, and they also weren't really massive commercial successes, these games still have very much alive and active communities, whereas the AC Shadows subreddit is basically dead. It had 2 months of hype where they were, 2 weeks rather, of hype where they were trying to kind of gaslight themselves into believing that this game was the big cultural moment of this year, and then every engagement basically just disappeared. This is how you recognize that a game isn't actually successful or even good, because no one just bothers talking about it outside of fighting some internet argument. The saddest thing is that we'll see many more games like AC Shadows, which have this short push of trying to declare them a success, and then everyone loses interest and moves on because the game that people are trying to hype is actually trash. And we will never be able to deal with this until media outlets start reporting on objective design flaws instead of burying them under PR fluff. We will have to accept more fiascos until reviewers manage to separate the objective craftsmanship of game design from their personal and subjective judgment of the artistic merit of a video game. Anyway, that's all for today's rant. If you enjoyed this critique, or even if you hated it, don't forget to drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. Yes, even you most passionate Ubisoft defenders, I'm dying to hear the latest spin. And if you want more honest takes on the gaming industry, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Until next time, stay toasty, cheers!